the first and the last three events that we had this semester. The next event will be here in 2 days, and I'm delighted to see our guest speaker in the audience today, Evgeny Steiner. And the last event this semester will be on December 10th, next Tuesday, at the Unread Center, and it's going to be a film screening of a remarkable film called Balls, which has very little to do with the artist. But we will be joined with the film director, Sergei Livnev, for the questions. So please come to these two events that are following this. Today, our guest is Katya Margolis, whom many of you know, but let me still introduce her very briefly, and her talk will speak for itself and for Katya's geographical whereabouts. So Katya comes from Venice, where she lives and works. She's an artist. She's also a literary writer, I should say. She has also worked with children with health conditions and taught them to draw. And this is a very large part of her life, I should say. Today, Katya will talk about her not native city, but a city that she has known very, very well, including its most recent kind of occurring natural developments, not to say disasters, the flood that Venice is still recovering from, and has been recovering from for a number of centuries. So if you wanted to ask anything about this, sorry?
Quite successfully.
Quite successfully, yes. And this makes Venice kind of very different from the traditional representations of natural disasters, such as floods in Russian literature. We have had the bronze horseman this semester, so this is going to be quite different in its representation, not to mention the scale. So the topic of Katya's talk is Venice Unread, which is something that intrigues us precisely because of the second part, of the unread part. And you will hear what it is about in a second from Katya herself, but Venice has, of course, traditionally been depicted in art, in literature, perhaps more than any other European city. At the same time, it's never read entirely, so perhaps this is a good point to turn it over to Katya to hear more about how it's read and unread at the same time. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Please welcome.
So, first point I want to make, I will not talk about quiet and disaster. That's the topic of my next talk. It will be the fifth transport Evans stage, or whatever it is, and that will be particularly the topic of the next meeting. Art is a cultural metaphor, so I'll try to avoid as much as possible this topic today and talk about other things, but I'm absolutely open to answering questions and perils later on, because that's become a hot topic or a wet topic over the last weekend.
Maybe microphone. Sorry.
Microphone, do you need a microphone?
We
I
don't
can speak
have a
louder.
microphone.
Yeah? Is it alright?
Don't move closer. There are still more seats here.
Is it alright right now?
You do need a microphone.
I do need the microphone, okay. Okay, I'll try to speak as loud as I can.
Яшка, скажите, куда сбегать?
Let's move closer and it will be more
Yeah.
audible.
That's right.
Просто мы сейчас.
Walk across Venice. Venice read, overread, unread, depicted, over-depicted, and under-depicted. And I'll just start with a small personal But once I walked along this fundamenta, which is fundamenta dell'Exatore, rough embankment, with my shopping cart full of shopping. Of course, I was, as always in Venice, any season and any time of the day, was full of tourists running for sightseeing and trying to fit all the possible and impossible cultural beauties and attractions in the agenda. And as they overpassed me, I heard people speaking English, Russian, French. Actually, over the years I spent in Venice, I noticed that the languages can come by waves. There's a period when you hear English all the time. When it's at carnival time, you feel that in a French city, you hear French all the time. There was some English people, German, Russian, of course. So there were English people, English-speaking people, and Russian-speaking tourists running along the same embankment, but attracted to two different things. While all English-speaking floor stopped at this nice Pensione Calcina. If you imagine, I'll show the map of Venice later. They would stop there and admire this place where the great hero and the major figure of English literature, art critics, and everything of the predecessor of arts and craft movement, John Ruskin stayed, and it's put in Italian in a very pompous way, sacerdote dell'arte, priest of art, nelle nostre pietre, nel nostro San Marco, quasi in ogni monumento d'Italia, c'è poi insieme l'animo degli artifici e l'animo del popolo, who serves in every image of our San Marco, in the stones of our San Marco, and in every monument of Italy. I was looking for the handmade soul and soul of the people. So while all the English-speaking floor stopped by this pensione, tried to read this description and tried to stop here and worship in a way the memory of John Ruskin, the Russian folk passed by without paying any attention to it at all. Because the modern Russian, we'll talk about this later, were attracted to a different love, which is few feet away, and it is Joseph Brodsky, who is the Venice itself for modern Russian reading and Russian speaking people. And again, this inscription in Italian, Brodsky, questo grande poeta russo, premio Nobel, amò e contò questo luogo. Joseph Brodsky, great Russian poet, the Nobel Prize winner, loved and sang this place. While for the Russian-speaking audience, I know there are some people here who don't read Russian, but I'll make just a very small riddle for a Russian-speaking audience. There is a mistake in the Russian inscription. There is a mistake. If someone doesn't even see it, it says, I'll read it in Russian. Иосиф Бродский, великий русский поэт, лауреат Нобелевской премии, воспел набережную Мессеринь. Да? Прошло.
There is no quotation mark.
Quotation mark, which means, exactly, it says, Fondamenta dell'Anturabile, the incurable embankment, the incurable, it's put in the quotation mark, like he sang his own book, while they meant that he sang the plays, of course. And so it's not as like the referential, but that's not the point I want to know. So I was looking at these two different floors, English-speaking stopping at the Pensione where Ruskin stayed, and Russian stayed here on this Fondamenta dell'Incurabile, where the famous hospital of the incurable used to be Accademia delle Belle Arti, the Academy of Arts is now. Actually, Brodsky, when he was doing his book, preparing his commissioned work, it was a commissioned work by an organization, Venetian organizations, and the English title, as we all know, is Watermark, while the translator, Grigory Dashevsky, preferred to change it in Russian for the Italian title, Fondamenta dell'Incurabile, the invention of the incurable. The incurable meaning there was this hospital of the incurable people, but also it meant, of course, people ill by Venice who can't be cured from Venice, from this love, from this attraction, from this rejection, because Venice has always been the great topic for metaphor for Russian and for English speaking and for French and for German and so on. So that's what we're going to talk about. So, looking at this map of Venice, it is Venice. Some people see a fish here, some people see two hands. When little children are taught how to find their way in Venice, they are taught like this. They have two hands. This is the Grand Canal, and here's San Marco, and that's how children learn their way in Venice. Actually, if we think of this map of Venice as a cultural plan like mental map in a way, I was trying, after making this observation of people being attracted to different cultural places, according to what luggage they came with. Because we come to a place with a certain luggage, not only physical luggage, but mostly mental luggage. Literature that we read, pictures that we saw, stories that were told, etc. Especially literature. So when we see things for the first time, especially so hardly burdened things with cultural meanings and metaphors, and things like Venice, actually, what we do, in a way, we compare the picture, the preconceived picture of what we have already, of what we read, what we saw in cinema, of the photographs, and everything that we've been told before, with what we actually see, and trying to find signs of this, on landmarks, in this real landscape. We are trying to find these cultural landmarks. In a way, what we see is what we've read, and the itineraries we make. Of course, Venice is made in such a way to be lost, and everyone who's been to Venice once or twice there was this experience of being lost in Venice. Next, so if we look at the map of Venice as a text, landscape as a text, and here I just put my own artwork, trying to interpret the actual landscape with the watercolor, and then the text, it's drawn by Montale. What we see is how we wander across the city is similar how we look at things. There is a famous experiment, most of you probably know about it, of Yarmos in '67, about the eye movements. He was the first one to study how people look at, especially at artwork. What we see, how do we see, how do we look at things? How do we look at, for example, this profile? There are a few ways of looking at things. And first of all, it's a cognitive way. What is important for us as human beings? The expression, eyes, lips. And you can see what he's done. There was no technology at that time, of course. What he's done, he would kind of little mirrors to the eyes of people, and then there was the photo paper left traces with light as people moved their eyes. And he was trying to trace the eye movements of different people looking at the same work of art. And here are the schemes. But what interests us here is not just the so-called cognitive way of looking at things, like the eyes, the lips, but also the cultural way of living. There's this famous painting, he studied this famous painting by Levin, it has nothing to do with Venice, but it's actually Nizhdalia, where he studied how people looked at this painting. And they're examining the picture, this unexpected visitor, it's called in English, with these schemes refer to looking at the same paintings with different questions in mind. Actually, the number A is a free examination. What people look at when they just look at this painting. Of course, they see the key figures, the composition is made in such a way that people look from the main figure to this woman who is moving towards him, and then the children, and but what is more interesting, for instance, B is a question, is a visual answer to a question. The question was estimate the material circumstances of the family in the future. So when being asked a question, we start to look at different details. So here people are looking, if in free examination we look at the people and the relationship with this question about the material circumstances of the financial well-being of the family, people start to look at furniture, at things on the wall, etc., etc. There are other questions like give the ages of the people. So people start to scan every figure separately. Or the surveys what the family has been doing before the arrival of the expected visitor. E, remember the clothes of the people. So here the faces become less important. People are trying to scan the clothes. Remember the position of the people and the objects in the room. And this is the most interesting thing, actually, it's less material, less estimate how long the unexpected visitor has been away from the family. And here, people try to visually study the relationship. They're trying to evaluate things that are hardly to be perceived at the first glance. And then where people actually being asked a question, people start to look at things differently. And it's quite an obvious point, but it is not as obvious as we think. Actually, the traditional study, now we are moving to the landscape, moving to the Venetian landscape, which actually introduced the same kind of idea. I just put few casual tourist itineraries on the map. It doesn't matter, San Marco, Zatri, or Punta della Dogana, people know Venice, they can see here, for instance here, you see this embankment of the Caraveli. But actually, if we look at the itineraries on the map, on the cultural map of Venice, it can be compared with the same kind of experiment. When people left on their own, they just wander around, they still have some main cultural point. They know that Venice is San Marco, Rialto, anyone knows it. It doesn't matter whether it's an English-speaking person or a French-speaking person or a Russian-speaking person, everyone would go to San Marco, everyone would go to Rialto. And then flows start to deviate. Some people will go around the Ponte dei Sospiri, for instance, the Bridge of Sighs will return. It was first described it is a major point in our mentality point. It is so spirit that a little bridge that links together the Dodgers Palace and the famous prison, Pyongyang. And we think of it as an obvious landscape mark of Venice, but it was actually first noted by Lord Byron, and then I'll show the cultural itinerary, how it came to our mentality, to Russian culture, to French culture, to German culture, and there are a few other things. So actually, when just talking to friends who came visiting, for instance, a lot of people ask me, a lot of English-speaking people ask me about Consiglio Ruskin. I never heard the question about Ruskin from a Russian-speaking audience, which makes it quite different from the pre-revolutionary state of things, and I'll mention that slide later. Now, actually, if we think now of this Venetian landscape, the mental map of Venice, let's think of Venice as a kind of the mental cultural map of our brain when we come to visit. If we think about this, we can imagine landscape, and landscape has been, since the semiotic theory evolved, has been largely analyzed as a text, in the cultural text, and the readings, and then the idea and the concept of landscape as text evolved and evaluated and changed as the whole semiotic theory changed, and it is more, now it is more seen as an open possibility of interpretations by not only the writer's intentions, but also it now includes all the possibilities of arbitrary interpretations by readers. Or if we project the same idea to Venice or to the map, it means that we all, when we come with a certain, to read a certain text and pass by certain itineraries, but of course our interpretations, our ideas, our writings of what has been already written about Venice contribute to this, to the text. So this is the text, the landscape. This is actually text has traveling, reading, and writing have been, of course, closely related since the very early origin of writing itself. And that's the famous, the ancient way of writing, what is called, was the freedom, which relates to the idea of the ox plowing the field. And when the ox, it goes like this. Yeah? We need to plow a field, to plant a field, you go like this. And that's where the Greeks, in some Greek inscription, they used the same kind of boustrophic writing. Actually, if you read it, so books were written half right side up and up, half upside down, all reading would be twice as fast, and the eye would be less likely to lose its spot moving from one line to the next. You can see that by the third line, you're quite used to this kind of writing. So the idea of writing and reading, there's nothing new about it, is very much related to the idea of traveling, of seeing things. So that's, and we do more or less the same thing as we walk across the city. We do the same thing. We walk across the text and we visualize things. And this is the very early, actually, landscape, as an early example of Venetian painting of the landscape, which includes the Eve, which is already some position of St. Mark's Square. And here we can see that actually here visually he is trying to introduce the text of the events of the government, of the procession, that took place about 14 years before this work was painted. And it is the first depiction of St. Mark's Square. But the idea is that people here made into processions, and from there, from how they're dressed and how they're put on a landscape, one can draw, I will not stop on that, a lot of conclusion about this structure, not only the structure of the visual landscape, but the structure of the Venetian society, which was, and of the Venetian ways of doing things, of introducing the order of things in Venice, and as well as silver painting, orientated about Siena's good government. You know, this fresco shows that the way good government put things on their places. So in a way, it's visualized the concept of the city structure and the hierarchical structure of the society. So now we pass to our friend Lord Byron, who was the first here I stood in Venice in Bridge of Sighs and told in the prison age, and is the first cantor of the Child Harold's pilgrimage. And as we know, Byron lived in Venice and visited Venice many times, and he also is famous for his famous swim from the main island, Venice, to Lido, which is quite a long way. If anyone tried it, it's about 20 minutes about Loretto. But it was the quotation index of these lines in the mid-19th century probably was the highest of any quotation about Venice in the whole history of literature. He influenced every writer in English, or Russian, or French literature on Venice. But as I already mentioned, here's the place where he stayed, New York, and again, it's his room. As I already mentioned, that was his romantic view of a man who believes in everything, finding him inside the society separate from it, which later, of course, in Russian literature influenced greatly Pushkin and many other, Lermontov and many other 19th century writers. What is interesting about Byron is also that the work is quite witty, rather ironic texts about Venice that never entered the corpus of our ideas about Venice. While his description in the fourth canto of Pilgrimage of Childe Harold became the iconic verse of, I'll just read the beginning. I stood in Venice on the Bridge of Sighs, a palace and a prison in each hand. I saw from out the wave her structures rise, and from this stroke of the enchanter's wave. 1,000 years the cloudy wings expand around me, and a dying glory smiles, where the far times when many a subject land looked to the wind-blunt marble piles, where Venice sate in state, throned on her 100 isles. This is it. And the next English-speaking author, what we do not connect at all with Venice, is the Russian speakers, is Dickens. Dickens was a major poet, I would say, of the writing prose of Venice. And he was actually, unlike Byron and Ruskin, I'll talk about Ruskin slightly later, he was the first one to talk about Venice not as in an encyclopedic way, describing monuments and things and separate attractions, but he started the whole tradition of very personal Venice. His famous writing, The Pictures from Italy, Dickens spent few years, I think 5 years in Italy. He was based mostly in Genoa, but he came to Venice quite often. And unlike other little chapters in this book, the Pictures from Italy, his chapter, number 7 about Venice, differs dramatically from all other descriptions of all other Italian towns and cities. It's just no structure of his chapter. If you haven't read it, it's just little snapshots of local life, observation of Italian customs, some small remarks, and basically it's a travelogue aimed for a quite middle-class armchair reader at the fireplace, remembering or imagining his trip to Italy. Quite a classical genre for 19th century. Well, what happens in chapter 7 in Venice is quite a break away from this formula. He knows that the expectation to write about Venice are very high already. But he is trying to do a different thing. He's trying to describe his whole Venetian experience as a dream. He's expecting to come to Venice. He's dozing on a coach, on a train, and he has this dream. And in this dream, I will not. He puts bits and pieces of his real Venetian experience, but they are all woven into his dream. It's a kind of posty sitting on water that appears and disappears. And I really recommend everyone who loves Venice or doesn't love Venice, doesn't know Venice, to write, because it's absolutely, especially for Russian readers of Russian Dickens, the big thing in Russian literature and Russian tradition as well. And it's a quite unexpected way of looking at things. And I will even cite small things. All that I had heard of it, wrote of it in truth of fiction, fancied of it, is left thousands of miles behind. You know that I am liable to disappoint in such things from over-expectation. But Venice is above, beyond, and out of all reach of coming near the imagination of man. It has never been rated high enough, right? It's his letter, it's his first letter, 44. And then he says, it is beyond all pen and or pencil. I never saw the thing before I should be afraid to describe. But to tell that Venice is, I feel to be an impossibility. And then he writes, unsubstantial magic of the time, and diving again into vast churches and old tombs, a new sensation, a new memory, a new mind came upon me. Venice is a bit of my brain for this time. This mind-changing, Venice being a commonplace and at the same time being something totally new, became a new tradition of writing about Venice. And Dickens is the first one to initiate that, and this tradition is especially strong in Russian literature, in Russian writers about Venice, starting from Pushkin, moving on to dozens and hundreds of, especially poetry. Now the big anthology made by Timinchik and Sobolev. It's about 1,000-page volume, of Russian Veneziana, starting from the 18th century and ending in 1972 is the date of publication of the first poem on Venice by Joseph Brodsky, which marked another era in describing Venice according to this anthology. And another thing I would recommend is this brilliant anthology by John Julius Norwich, who is the greatest historian and writer about Venice. It's called A Traveler's Reader, and it contains all various bits and pieces of writing of traveling writers by English speaking, and not only English speaking, but mostly English speaking people, to Venice, dating from the 14th century to our days. And it has Dickens, and it has legends of Byron and Mark Twain comparing, who hated Venice and was quite deluded and compared San Marco to the big cockroach, very ugly, on these fat columns crawling slowly across the piazza. So there are people who love Venice and who hate Venice, but it's a very, very thrilling reading, I would say. But moving back to this English tradition, we come to John Ruskin and his famous Stones of Venice. I won't stop it at all, but again, I read a short entry from his diary when he first came to Venice. Thank God I'm here. It is the paradise of cities, and there is a moon enough to make half the centuries of the earth's lunatic, striking pure flashes of light against the grey water before the window. And I'm happier than I have been in these 5 years, so happy. Happier than in all probability I ever shall be again in my life. That's what a 22-year-old Ruskin writes in his diary. And he, of course, became a great part of Venetian story, not only in describing it, in looking at it, but also a big contribution, made a big contribution, but this volume made a big contribution to the conservation of monuments, to the depiction of very small details of, for instance, the whole, it's kind of encyclopedic, pictorial and also verbal volumes that were aimed to save, as in his idea, the dying Venice of this time, to preserve it from disappearing and help people restore it. And here are a few. He spent a lot of deal depicting, and it was mainly a Gothic city, and it is a very important point for Ruskin, obviously. The Gothic with craftsmen and morality and worshipping is kind of ideal city, being the predecessor of the arts and crafts movement. He worshipped Venice, especially as a Gothic city, and that's one of the reasons he hated so much Palladio and all the Palladian introduction to Venice, because he thought it was a counter-Gothic, counter aesthetic to what he wanted Venice to be. And it was, and again, being very encyclopedic, being very precise in detail, being very faithful to every ornament or column. He sees Venice as an ideal city to which his ideas are projected. His ideas as thinker, his ideas as art critic, and as his philosophical idea. So in a way, being, as we see from many examples, being a very strongly burdened place by cultural burdened place. At the same time, Venice, in a strange way, becomes an ideal place, kind of tabula rasa, one sheet of paint for one's own projections. Everyone has, in Brodsky wrote later, everyone has his own ideas on Venice and interested in Venice. Interest not only in the material sense, but also in, so everyone sees what she or she wants to see in Venice. And here I just put two examples of, this is the famous Ballad of Redentore church that Ruskin dedicated quite surprising pages to. And this is a new Gothic with the Rialto market, fish market, the 19th century building that is very much in the spirit of the Gothic Venice that Ruskin would have approved, but he didn't have an opportunity to see. It was built later. But again, even looking at the further development, we can project his, for instance, Ruskin's ideas on the contemporary landscape of Venice and see Venice through Ruskin's eyes. Now, getting to the Russian Venice, I want to again, Ruskin was widely read and praised and very well known by Russian writers in the Russian tradition. Well, now, and it's completely the same is about Byron and but slightly less Dickens, although Dickens probably Little Tugboat was quite a famous novel in Russian, and as we know, part of the plot is that when the family is released from the death prison, they travel to Venice, and the little girl, Amy, who has never seen anything by that prison in her life, the first thing she sees in life is Venice. So she, the juxtaposition of her images of her childhood in prison is alternates with this sights of Venice, and she compares it with the prison impression all the time. If you really read this patient, there's a kind of flashback. She looks at this Palazzo Grand Canal and thinks, oh, that's so much, this room is so much bigger than our cell in Marshall, in the prison. But the interesting thing about this, that in this description of Venice is a flashback to something else, it is a very much a Proustian thing, and Proust is another big name in Venice. Depiction and another itinerary in the floor, in the tourist floor, because for instance, all French go to Palazzo Pontarini-Polignac. It's a Renaissance, beautiful Renaissance palazzo near the Academia Bridge, where Marcel Proust and his friend Leonardo stayed many times. It has a long history, which was bought by Venerator Zinger, who was the daughter of the inventor of the sewing machine, and she bought it for her husband, Edmond de Polignac. They were both gay people. They were happily married to each other. Edmond died very young, and she, being a rich woman, she wanted to please Edmond. So she bought, it was once they were staying in Palazzo Barbaro, which is another famous palace related to Venice and related to Henry James and the Curtis family, and this way related to New York, where they stayed once, and Edmond said, what a beautiful Renaissance palace we have in front of us, and that's how Venerator decided to make this little present. So anyway, this became a place of visits of many important French figures, and Proust stayed there many times. And Proust, in his Albertine Disparu, again used this technique of flashbacks of Combray and Venice, a kind of really cinematic technique of depicting Venice by depicting something else. So, well, I probably have to bypass Turner, which is another visual tradition quite parallel to the Ruskin and English literature itinerary. Of course, we know that Turner was a major painter, major artist who depicted Venice, but his attraction to Venice started again with Byron, with literature. Before this is a kind of famous painting, Child Girl's Pilgrimage. So when he first started to depict Venice, he started with literary parallels with Shylock, with Juliet, and then on the later on, he overcame his preconceptions, his literary preconceptions, and that's how Venetian Turner became what he became. I already mentioned Henry James, and Henry James, just a small thing, Henry James continued the same tradition, but Venice being quite ironic in his writing about Venice, and it's to his, he once said that the most interesting thing you can say about Venice, that there is nothing new you can say about Venice. And which later was acknowledged by many people, and especially now the present contemporary Venice-based poets and Venice-based writers that I know, for instance, and there are a lot of various cultures and languages. They almost never write about Venice as Venice. They avoid this topic because it's a complex, it's a cliché. Because for them, Venice is a place of inspiration, a place where to meet, but not a subject of their writing. You can write. But Henry James' writings about very deep, close, personal connection, and he sees Venice with in a romantic kind of relationship with a woman. You can see this here. So was it Russian Venice, and in Russian Venice, there are non-Russian speaking people here. I'll try to be as brief as possible. As I mentioned, there's a long tradition. And what is interesting that before the revolution, this tradition is very much linked to the English tradition, especially English. There are, of course, links to Gautier, to Unread, but it is mostly English. Russian Venice and English Venice are very much the same. Mandelstam gives a little different Venice, and he starts, or not starts, but continues the line of death in Venice, and Venice as death. I think all Russian-speaking people know this point, so I invite English-speaking people to write it. I'll just say a small thing. Венецийской жизни мрачной и бесплодной для меня значение светло, загорать блудицу, липкую, холодную, голубое, дряхлое стекло. And then тяжелые твои Венецию горы, кипарисных храмов зеркала, воздух твой граненый, спальни тают горы, голубого дряхлого стекла. The air has faces in the bedroom, saw mountains of blue reflected glass. And here again we see the juxtaposition, because of course glass, mirror, water, all these and death, vanity, and a long line of various also metaphors that grow through, especially Russian literature about Venice. But an interesting thing about that Mandelstam, according to most, has never been to Venice. Although some people claim, based on these two lines, that I had spent in the bedroom saw mountains of blue reflected glass. It's quite enigmatic in a way. But people who have been actually to Venice can see that in the clear winter days, one can see the Dolomite Mountains in the background. It is blue, they are blue, and they look like glass. And actually, when you open the window, the northern side of Venice, if you stay in Fondamentale, you can see those mountains, the reflection of those mountains in your window, which very much corresponds to the description. And there is actually one article on some colleague from Jerusalem University who, basing on this, claims that Mandelstam had actually been to Venice, because it is impossible to imagine this kind of image without actually seeing it. It's quite technical description in a way. Well, another example, and he makes reference to Tintoret and Susanna and the elders, the sinking Venice, Venice having blood, Venice's beauty, which later we can see in Brodsky. He also cited the same Susanna and the elders. It has also problems because Doges of Venice were elected after the age of 17, and Venice is being always young and beautiful, and elders looking after her, not always with good intentions. And another thing about this poem, that it refers of course to some Marco mosaics, and it has a direct reference. И горят в корзинах свечи, словно голод залетел в ковчег, and candles burning in the baskets, like the dove go back into the ark. I will leave apart, as I said, the idea of the ark, of the flood, of the aqua alta, and all the metaphors that go with it, and just switch to another quite iconic Russian poem about Venice by Pasternak, who, strangely enough, continues not the English but the German tradition, because the German tradition of Venice is mostly an acoustic one, a sonoric one. Goethe wrote a lot about gondoliers singing, and there are whole passages of Journey to Italy dedicated to Venice about the songs and music and the acoustics. And also, interesting enough, Wagner, who of course read Goethe, also writes about his impressions, his first impressions about Venice, hearing the cry of the gondola, ooh, ooh. Actually, when gondolas turn the corners and there are no lights and no signals in order to avoid accident, there's a special, that I can't that I can't reproduce. And this way they tell that the gondola is going around the corner that the sun is coming. So this oe cadenza was used by Wagner in his Tristan and Isolde thing. And Pasternak here describes Venice through a cry that he hears in the morning, and knowing Pasternak's appreciation and inclinations towards German philosophy, and it was actually his main topic, and while we can see the German line in this cultural itinerary. I will and here we come to Joseph Brodsky, the landmark for most Russians. Now Russians who come to Venice, they torture Venetians. They only figure where's the Fundamento del Mirabile and where's the tomb of Joseph Brodsky at San Michele. And Venetians, some Venetians are quite pleased with it, some Venetians are quite annoyed by it, because worshipping, and I was one of these neophytes when I came to Venice, worshipping, they make a point of that Venice is such a special place that just no matter, Joseph Brodsky, one of Byron, or Wagner, or Goethe, or Marseille, which is just one of our priests, while Venice itself is the god, the temple, the place, and therefore they're trying to diminish the association of every tourist who they're quite pleased. Or like a lot of good people wrote about all this, yes. I will not stop it long in general because it is a topic. But in itself, what is interesting are the small artifacts that appear in watermark, and later on is the same artifact that appear in Goethe's journey to Italy. When people see small things from Venice, a Murano glass vase, or a small gondola, or a photograph that come from Venice before they actually go to Venice. It's kind of small childhood memory of something they haven't actually seen. And coming with this small memory, they project this small memory on the big city, on the big cultural myth. And what we have as a result of it, if we try to, and I hope it will be done, if we map all these cultural intersecting itineraries on the map of Venice and cover different floors of nationality, national writing, and paintings to different times, like 19th century and 20th century, what we get is a complicated palimpsest picture, palimpsest being a text, overwritten a half-erased text, overwritten another text, and Venice itself is a cultural place. The mental map and the cultural map appears to be such a palimpsest where everyone wanders and moves from one layer to another layer according to one's cultural tradition, to one's reading, and to one's expectations. And the last thing I would probably want to mention, as I already cited Henry James, there is nothing, the new thing about Venice, there is nothing new that can be said about Venice. Venice is full, of course, is full of discoveries, and both from semiotic point of view, when every interpretation contributes to the text, even visually, there have been quite a lot of very important discoveries of matching missing pieces together in a kind of mosaics, like in San Marco, you see the little tiles or torcello, and they put together. And one of the two, I just want to quote two famous, one quite famous example of Venetian painting, one of the first scenes, Carpaccio hunting in the lagoon, the 15th century, and what was always enigmatic about it, it's a very faithful in detail. You can see the cormorana, the bird, the marsh bird here, and the hunting with the north of Venice, and we can see Dolomites that I said before in the background. More or less what we see today if we go towards Torcello to the north. But it's quite enigmatic with this orchidea that never grows in the lagoon. And people have been thinking for long where it grows, but it doesn't grow there. So what's some symbolic meaning and other meanings, but actually what happened later. There's another famous painting by Carpaccio, the two Venetian, the analyzed courtesan, then the noble women, two Venetian ladies. It is in Museo Corre. And only by, and you see a little vase in the left corner, upper left. And what happened actually, that this was one painting with this orchidea thing. It has nothing to do with the lagoon hunting. It was discovered to be the plot of this not famous painting that appeared, that has always been in Moselle Correr, or recently in the Getty Museum, and appeared in provenance is not quite clear, it appeared in the mid-19th century. But the point I want to make that matching two quite different things we know about Venice makes us contribute to the whole, to the vision of the whole. And the recent quite interesting discovery made by my friend, who's a composer who came just now to visit in the German Center of Composition with a scholarship. He was just wondering about Venice and made a very important discovery. He basically discovered, looking at the Negroponte painting in the Maltese church, he discovered that this little lunette was not quite in style with the Negroponte. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of people seeing this painting every day. It's quite, they're very painted by Negroponte. And in the next church, just next to San Francesco della Vigna, there's a very famous painting by Bellini, the Baptiste. So if you put this lunette on the top of this painting, they actually fit. It made big news. I made a picture a few weeks ago. This boy was just wondering, he shared this idea with one of his friends, and the major Italian art critic Garbi concluded that this may be the discovery of new Bellini. So what we see is that looking at things only around Venice can still contribute to this possessive text, no matter where we come from the musical side, from the literary side, from the Russian side, from the English-speaking side. It all contributes to the Venice, the holistic text that is still to be read.
We have at least half an hour of questions. I'm sure there are many. May I ask the first?
Yes.
So from the quotes that you showed and from the authors of those quotes, it appears that while Venice is a profoundly feminine city, should we say, or perhaps the more feminine it appears to be, the more masculine its representation also appears to be across different cultures. So is this a pattern? Is it different in Italian literature?
I don't think
Or
so.
is this an external point of view?
That Venice is feminine, or Venice is masculine?
Okay, both. Seeing it as feminine does not necessarily mean that it is.
Well, one reason is purely grammatical. La città Venezia Serenissima contributed the idea it is she. It is a feminine city. And of course, in Italian, as you know, from secular work as language shapes the world, of course, it becomes automatic for an Italian that Venice is she rather than he.
Okay, but English language writers who do not have the mark
Yes,
category
yes,
still.
yes, of course. It is still a pattern, and even when females, and I skipped this thing. There's a very interesting first female probably, and first English account about Venice. Fiona Piozzi is the end of 18th century, very interesting travelogue, where she describes just in her diary how she lives in Venice, how she goes there. She describes this on Market Square, or for instance, she describes how she was not let into some Georgian monastery, and some people told her you should have changed your clothes to the men clothes, and then you can go. So it was quite a widespread practice to see the Carpaccio painting at the time it was in. But still, of course, and I can interpret my own experience, one has a kind of personification of Venice one is attracted to Venice, but also it is a reflection. There is a lot of Brodsky writes, there is a lot of narcissism about the city being a mirror and water. So probably for women it should be analyzed. But what I remember generally is or even from the letters of Effie Ruskin's wife. Yes, women do recognize themselves in Venice while men sing and among their dumb.
It's a bit of a patriarchal view because always men are, well, this is from the graduates and words right about Venice, the woman and the beauty and everything, and like kind of also this view that they are kind of seeing it from above and using living there and just using it. What about the feminist?
Well, I think since we talk about history and the historical tradition of romantic literature is this tradition. The night and the what is the well, there's Jack Morris's writings, of course, about Venice, and I personally never thought of. But for instance, from the feminist point of view, as you know better than I do, for instance, the whole story is not about writing, it's about actual story of changing from patriarchal way of doing things to the more contemporary is the women gondoliers. This family, it was this famous process of one gondolier.
Actually, no, I recently heard that it was all a misunderstanding because she was actually transgender.
I met her recently, yes, yes, I just saw her a few days ago. Yeah, she was a transgender, but there's another one now, there are a few other ones. She's a transgender, but she applied as a woman, and there was a big objections come on for 10 years. She was trying to obtain the license to be gondolier, and she was refused based on the old codex that only men can be gondolier. And actually, the interesting connection, the Conte Marcello, who was Brodsky's friend, and to whom some of his poems were dedicated, he died recently, and he was a very generous man, and he read in some annals and some of that actually. And he was a descendant of the Doges, and the descendants of the Doges have a right to have a personal gondolier. So not everyone can drive gondolier. But the noble families, so the Doges family, had a right, and he found it, I don't know, 14th, 15th century book that he is entitled to have a gondola and a gondolier. So as a descendant of the Doges family, he officially hired this lady as his gondolier, and this way, by his own will, and he can choose, and this way she became the part of the gondoliers, and that's how he opened the way for other women to become gondoliers.
Thank you very much. That's a wealth of information, and to me some of it was completely new, so thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. There are two people I would like to add to your list. One is Tchaikovsky, who was reproached for his Italianism, and who did live in Venice, as we know. The other one is Hemingway. Venice was huge. Just across the river into the trees, or whatever. But so I think it's sort of.
Yeah, there was no. These are just examples. For the dozens and dozens of people. The Hemingway story is quite interesting itself and how it's linked to the Russia. And since Hemingway became so popular in Russia, became this hero figure, and every house had this photo portrait of Hemingway in his sweater. There's a very interesting photo archive of Hemingway in Venice. And I actually met some of the people that I mentioned in his novel, or people who knew these people. There's a separate talk to Hemingway in Venice, and Hemingway's Russian. And Tchaikovsky is also quite an interesting story, he didn't like Venice at all. In the beginning, he hated it, and he wrote, I don't remember to whom, he wrote that it's stinking, it's full of people and crowds, and the only way to get away from it is to put oneself in gondola and order someone to bring you away from it. Единственный способ, я не помню, как точно цитата, избежать этого, это сесть в гондолу и велеть себя вести.
I know you've been avoiding it, but would you say something about watermark?
Well, yes, of course, I have so much to say about watermarks that
Would you start?
well, if I just can open randomly a page and just the eye is the most autonomous of our organs. It is so because the objects of its attention are inevitably situated on the outside. Except the mirror, the eye never sees itself. And here we come to the whole, it's a very visual novel. It opens a new chapter in the Venetian visuality. It says the eye is, of course, the main hero of this novel, not his fiancée or his invented fiancée. And interesting enough, it is linked to another English tradition, which I'm not sure. It's about the whole and the part, and the part being bigger than the whole, and actually the outside, the last. The last passage. Let me reiterate. Water equals time and provides beauty with its double. Part water preserves beauty in the same fashion. By rubbing water, the city improves time's looks, beautifies the future. That's what the role of the city in the universe is. Because the city is steady while we are moving. The year is proof of that, because we go and beauty stays, because we are all headed for the future while beauty is eternally present. The cheer is an attempt to remain, to stay behind, to merge with the city, but that's against the rules. The tear is a throwback, a tribute of the future to the past, or else it is a result of subtracting the greater from the lesser, beauty from man. The same goes for love, because one's love too is greater than oneself. And this is quite another interesting comparison. There was a very famous and very interesting figure in the English Venice. He was called Baron Corbo, an English writer, present of him, who wrote this quite an interesting, and he actually died in Venice in the beginning of the 20th century. His writing of Venice is called The Desire and Pursuit of the Whole, which is partially very satiric about English society in Venice expats, and but a very romantic and very beautiful description of the first-hand experience of the real life in Venice. While Brodsky came to visit it often, but still it's in a way an external description of Venice, of the very profound and beautiful. Corbo's description of Venice, the pursuit of the whole, and it's about the part being more than the whole and the part is another important topic talking about Venice. He described his trips to Lagoon and he was described also by Auden, and again we have another link to Brodsky. Baron Corbo was a gay writer and had a very beautiful and romantic affair with one of the fishermen gondoliers, Venetian baby people, and it has wonderful passage about this time spent in the lagoon, about the boats, about very concrete details that you rarely find in more famous writing about Venice. It's a very first-hand experience, but the interesting thing is that his book is called The Pursuit of the Whole, and Brodsky ends his novel talking about part being more than a whole.
Guys, what about the Russians pursuing Thomas Mann and death in Venice and Wisconsin? That's the first thing I wanted to see, actually. I want to read
to be very honest, me too. The small personal, yes, of course it is important. I can't fit everything, and especially now Thomas Mann, because after Wisconsin, became more part of the visual and cinematic experience rather than literary experience. All the people, of course, read Thomas Mann, but Death in Venice, of course, one hears mother, and one visualizes the lagoon, the moment of commentary in the lagoon. And me too, I also, when I came for the first time, I really want to come to Venice. I was also convinced it was a very snobbish girl, and I wanted to go to Padua, and I believe that Venice is such a common place. And I avoided Venice, but I couldn't avoid it at the end. To make a long story short, but the interesting thing is that I never, of course I've seen the movie, but I never thought of it as a real place. And it happened, now that I know all the settings and all the places, where it was a lot of it was filmed on Lido, but some parts of it was filmed really near Hotel de Val, which is where Tazio goes to the beach and all these famous scenes are. And the other part was filmed on Alberoni, which is a very remote part of Lido, because that's where Visconti was looking for the special light, and then he just cut and fitted the two things together. And another interesting thing that in one of my first trips to Venice, I met a man who was a fisherman and the gondolier, and he told me about his father being part of the film. His father was a musician. He was playing for Visconti in the orchestra. When since the budget was very low, they asked musicians to appear in some scenes, and his father was asked to be a portier to take the coat of the main hero at the arriving at the hotel. So we see a lot of, actually now we see a lot of authentic Venetian faces in this film, not part of the crew, the team, because of the low budget, and most of them are musicians.
There are musicians there in the scene in the hotel.
They're in the scene, yeah, they're in the scene. He was a contrabassist, for instance, and actually I was so much impressed with his real father, the real person who knew his father, the film, I couldn't believe it. So when I came back to Moscow, it was the first thing I did. I put the video tape there and arrived to the scene to see whether he looks like him. He looked just like him. It's
now I will go and start.
It's also almost a documentary of the faces of the time. And then, of course, death, in the metaphor of death, and they say dying Venice, Venice decaying, Venice dying, Venice sinking, is another topic that is related to our recent events and to the Alpen, and it has a long tradition, especially in Russian literature and in Russian mentality. I know we talk about this.
It's actually a small error in a way, and it doesn't move the meaning. But the movie is called Death in Venice. It's der Tod in the movie. It's the death. It's not, it's not the hero's death which is portrayed. It's death as the death. It's der Tod.
And it's also
It's deathlessness.
The figure of death at the carnival, and even in Dostoevsky, even Brothers Karamazov, one he said, I want to go and die in the best cemetery. As soon as I have money, I'll go and die in the best cemetery. And well, a few days later, he cites Venice. So the idea to go and die in Venice. And there's another small story called Dinner that's called Высокая вода Венецианцев, the Aquatic Venetians, where the main character, she is diagnosed with cancer and she goes to Venice to die. This is a separate long tradition.
And Pound is there too. Pound is there too, right next to Brodsky.
Of course. Pound again is, and he's also in cemetery right next to Brodsky. How much Brodsky hated him or pretended to hate him.
You just mentioned,
Yeah.
and it actually responds with what I was going to ask, whether you could possibly mention any writings, English, Russian, or the language written book, published in the last 20 or so years, which can be compatible with their cultural value, because living with so Maidan days you mentioned.
Well, of course, there are a lot of things. There are a lot of people writing about Venice every second day. Of course, we cannot. I think we should wait. We cannot evaluate. But I quite like writing of Unread. I quite like the. I think it's in this radio by. John Morris, the same, the meaning of nowhere, got to yes, and she here has a beautiful book that's called Venice. I think it is quite classic, I would recommend it. Venice, of course, you can see film shooting every second. So, there was a recent film, The Tourist, with Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. And they just happened to live close, that we met them a few times, and there were a big fuss about when they filmed some scenes in the reality market. Remember, we went to the market, but I don't think it's a great masterpiece. So talking about cinema. I don't know. Now, I quite like talking about cinema. I like very much the recent film. It was an Italian André Segre, illustrator, Unread. It's a very beautiful, moving story of the contemporary Venice about a Chinese girl, refugee, or working at Chioggia. And Chioggia is a small fisherman island next, very close to Venice. And actually, when he's talking about Herzen, it says Dolore Dume, he's been to the early part of Venice, described by Herzen as Chioggia. So this film is also a movie is set in Chioggia, and she works in the bar, and she works in terrible conditions, and there's a lot of social immigration. And the title, and she met a local fisherman, was a very beautiful story, that I will spoil it for you, without personally. It goes very social and actual, and very beautiful and poetic. And the title, personally, it means, in Italian, it means I'm there, meaning is there, but also it means I'm read. Another meaning. So this is maybe about 6 years ago. So that if you happen to see it, watch it. It's one of the best movies I saw recently.
Maybe one more thing. When you showed the upside down reading text as landscape or as a way to navigate landscape, this made me think of Michel de Certeau's really famous essay on walking in the city, which he somehow chooses New York to be the focal point of it. But the main thing is that he contrasts two seemingly mutually exclusive perspectives onto a city, that of a tourist and that of a passerby or a walker who is unaware of the text he or she is constantly writing just by walking, right? So is there Venice being maybe the most touristic site on Earth? Is there anything that Venice could perhaps contribute to this otherwise interesting but perhaps a little bit reductionist model of looking at the city through the eyes of a tourist or through the legs, literally, the feet of a local? How does Venice negotiate these two perspectives?
Well, on one hand, it is true and not quite true from Venice. It's not more about what appears, I'm told what appears straight away in my head. It's more about stopping than about walking. The Venetians, they are quite aware where they live. Every Venetian knows the basic things about using their own city, and it's proud of can tell you the basic story of Rialto, San Marco, the story of the lagoon or the San Marco lyrics, more or less. However, ignorant or educated, but basic cultural things are part of the collective conscious. What differs is that we, as Venetians, they do walk, and because they have point A and point B to arrive to. Well, what tourists do, they stop all the time. They stop and they create traffic jams that really, even as streets being very narrow. I remember, and I do experience my own limitation when I need to take children to musical school for a certain time, a certain place, and there was a big block of tourists in front of the Byron's Palazzo, trying to find the entrance to Lord Byron here or something, or looking at some marble statue. So tourists stop and look at the Venetian, maybe sightsee, what sightsee things as they pass. Of course, they do recognize the same landmark, but they're part of the inner text. It's probably like learning to read. Venetians know this text by heart. Tourists, as a starter in reading, they stop every syllable and phrase and reread it and come back again. I think it's about something parallel to that, rather than to being unaware of the text. Of course, Venetians are unaware again, because Venetians know the basic things about their own city, culture, and history. They wouldn't look at it from the English, French, or Russian perspective. That was, I was going to say, of course, Russians, Venetian, or English or French people, they contribute to this text by these itineraries. They do, because that's this way they project their cultural luggage on the city map.
What do you think of Venetian?
Yeah, I wanted to mention especially, I do this pride, people, snob people, get snob her. I think she's a very clever writer. She does know Venice. She's an important figure in Venice. She knows what she writes about. So I think she's very decent in her genre. She's a very decent writer, and she's writing.
What's her name?
It's in life. Detective stories.
There are tourist sites in the novel.
Yes. She has a present. She knows the society. Yeah. And also
So, from what you were saying about Venice, how did you end up here? Why did the, or maybe no, even more so, why did you stay? What is that holds you there? That
It's a very, I didn't want to come there.
I know, but just maybe briefly.
Very briefly, I came there and I kind of knew the place where I came to. And when I started to recognize it from the first sight, it was quite, I never experienced anything like that. When I was 19, I was forced to by my father and friend who worked in one of the publishing houses in Venice, and she convinced me to come to Venice, and I said, okay, I'll go see San Marco on the house, and take the box and the companies and Rialto. And what actually happened, I walked out of the station, and I knew where to go, what to see, and how to go. And then, maybe it's about recognizing oneself, maybe it's about love affair, maybe it's both. But the more you live there, the more you become attached to it. It's like what Henry James wrote.
Did you end up being accepted as a foreigner into the local community, or you were mostly interacting with expats?
Well, there's no Russian community there. It consists of a lot of people, and Venice being historically very local. Actually, on one hand, Venice is a very provincial, typical provincial little Italian town. On the other hand, being Venice, people who come and choose to stay in Venice, no matter where, Americans, British people, French or German, it is a special race of people that interact with each other on this basis a lot of fun. So it's more about choosing or being attracted, having to live there.
But also with the locals, with the Italians as well? Or
Of course, yeah. A lot of mixed families, a lot of, it's a very small town, so it'll be nice.
We forgot Peggy Guggenheim.
Yes, she's kind of, I wanted to make this program. Actually, Venera Zinger, whom I mentioned before, she's the kind of musical counterpart of Peggy. They were contemporary, but the relationship, Peggy was represents the patroness of the artists, and depicting Venice, especially after war, is a separate variant of 50s in the visual art in Venice. What I always regretted of not being able to live in Venice in the 50s. Really, I always felt nostalgic when people, especially artists, told me about not only about Peggy, but visiting each other's atelier and the artistic life in Venice in the 50s. Absolutely amazing. So she's
If there are no questions, let's other? No? Thank you.